The judges of the International Military Tribunal surveyed the wooden benches inside the Palace of Justice. On the 20th of November, 1945, the Nuremberg courtroom held bureaucrats, propagandists, and military commanders who had managed the occupation of Europe from comfortable offices. Then their eyes settled on Ernst Kaltenbrunner. He stood out sharply among the fallen leadership of the Third Reich, towering over the other accused men at exactly 201 centimeters. Deep dueling scars slashed across his cheeks, marking him with a physical menace that the desk officials lacked. While others hid their crimes behind complex layers of administrative delegation and paperwork, he represented something different. Kaltenbrunner commanded the security forces of the regime, yet he always maintained a direct, personal connection to the violence that his peers usually avoided. He was not merely a distant signature on a typed deportation order. He visited the execution sites himself, watching the firing squads and gas vans operate up close alongside his subordinates. 42 years before he faced the military executioner in this German courtroom, his ideological path was already taking form. It began in Austria. The judges in 1946 saw an architect of terror, but his ideological path began with a striking paradox. A man raised by a middle-class attorney, armed with a 1926 doctorate in law, bypassed the courtroom to build an extremist underground. Ernst Kaltenbrunner was born in Ried im Innkreis on October 4, 1903. The town sat near the German border. His father expected his son to inherit the family practice. The young man attended the University of Graz. He studied the legal codes of a shattered nation. Austria faced severe economic devastation throughout the 1920s. The collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire left millions searching for radical solutions, and Kaltenbrunner found his exact answer in aggressive street-level nationalism. He joined the Nazi Party in 1930. 1 year later, he entered the SS. He made this choice long before Adolf Hitler took power in Berlin. No opportunist, just a fanatic. He aligned with the violent movement when wearing the uniform carried heavy personal risks. The Austrian government officially banned the Nazi Party in 1933. The organization went underground. Membership became a crime. Kaltenbrunner ignored the laws he was trained to uphold. His family anticipated a comfortable life of civil consultations, quiet evenings, and steady income. Instead, the doctor of law spent his time organizing illegal cells and recruiting militants. His covert work drew the attention of state authorities. Detectives tracked his networks. State police raided his meetings and sent the lawyer to a detention cell for illegal recruitment. The detention cell failed to stop the lawyer. In 1934, his network staged a failed rebellion, but by 1938, that conspiracy dictated state law. The Austrian government officially banned the party in 1933. Kaltenbrunner shifted from printing pamphlets to planning the July Putsch. Armed conspirators assassinated Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. The coup collapsed. Kaltenbrunner barely escaped prison, yet he proved his value to Berlin. He demonstrated a clear willingness to use physical violence for political leverage. 4 years passed. German troops crossed the border on March 12, 1938. The Anschluss absorbed the nation. The underground militant finally legitimized his status. Following the annexation, the 34-year-old radical secured the official post of higher SS and police leader in his homeland. The new commander chain-smoked constantly, leaving the distinct smell of cheap tobacco over the crisp fabric of his uniform. Almost 7 million Austrians suddenly fell under the authority of this single individual. He drank heavily during the workday, displaying crude habits that contrasted with the polished veneer cultivated by his peers. The dueling scars on his face served as prominent physical badges of his ideological commitment. While established figures like Reinhard Heydrich maintained a distance from physical violence, this Austrian outsider embraced the grim reality of his position. He transformed the Hotel Metropole in central Vienna into the primary headquarters for the regional Gestapo. From this requisitioned 19th-century building, He directed sweeping arrests targeting political opponents and Jewish residents. Unlike paper bureaucrats who remained behind their desks, he stepped out of his office to observe the consequences of his orders. Colleagues noted his personal presence during interrogations conducted in the basement cells. He actively chose to witness official executions, standing directly beside the firing squads. Heinrich Himmler usually avoided the sight of blood, but his representative demanded full visual confirmation. His direct engagement with physical punishment defined his administrative approach. The crude demeanor made him an effective enforcer. His constant presence at execution sites established a new working standard. Regional leadership now required witnessing the final moments of the condemned. By the winter of 1938, his immediate jurisdiction encompassed exactly 6,700,000. Overseeing those millions meant reporting to exactly one man. Heinrich Himmler was the Reichsführer SS. A former chicken farmer from Waldtrudering, he built Europe's largest security apparatus through daily administrative obsession. He sat behind a heavy oak desk covered with neatly stacked official papers. He buried himself in obscure racial theories and ancient occult rituals. Ernst Kaltenbrunner dismissed such mysticism entirely. He cared only for the tangible mechanics of power. While the Reichsführer chased ideology, his Austrian subordinate remained a calculating pragmatist. He treated state violence as a practical tool. He executed mass murder orders without philosophical hesitation. This stark operational contrast dictated the high-level personnel shifts approaching on January 30th. The January 30th personnel shifts defied Berlin's expectations. A provincial Austrian official with zero capital connections suddenly claimed the most powerful security post in the Reich. The chair had been empty for 8 months. Back in May 1942, operatives ambushed Reinhard Heydrich in Prague during Operation Anthropoid. Heydrich died days later. His headquarters on Prinz Albrechtstrasse remained vacant. The former chief had chaired the Wannsee Conference just months prior. Now his wide desk sat empty. Folders containing the extermination protocols he signed still demanded execution. Himmler needed a new commander for the Reich Main Security Office. The RSHA directed the Gestapo, the SD intelligence, and the criminal police. Handing over this agency meant transferring control over thousands of agents across occupied Europe. Heydrich had been a dangerous rival. He held independent influence. Himmler refused to make that mistake twice. He sought a loyal executor. Ernst Kaltenbrunner fit the exact requirement. He spent years running underground operations in Austria. He managed regional police networks with strict competence. Crucially, he lacked the political ambition to challenge Himmler's authority in Berlin. The supreme post required an administrator who asked no questions. On January 30th, 1943, the promotion became official. Kaltenbrunner assumed direct command over all unified police services. Taking Heydrich's empty chair, Kaltenbrunner inherited an apparatus designed to eliminate people far beyond Germany's borders. Tens of thousands of RSHA operatives enforced this mandate across occupied Europe. He directed the terror network from the Prinz Albrechtstrasse headquarters in Berlin. Couriers brought daily intelligence reports from the SD. Field agents operated everywhere. The criminal police abandoned ordinary law enforcement, joining the front line of mass executions. Clerks pounded ink stamps onto deportation orders. Kaltenbrunner oversaw it all. He reported directly to Himmler, but commanded with wide autonomy. The scope of repression demanded vast manpower. The Gestapo alone employed 45,000 agents. 45,000 Gestapo agents required strict control. This command style would eventually lead Ernst Kaltenbrunner to a secluded alpine cabin under arrest in May 1945. Yet, despite holding a doctorate in law, he preferred raw physical force over elegant administrative schemes. He frequently visited Mauthausen concentration camp near his hometown of Linz. The inspection began with a walk past the overcrowded barracks. Then, he took his position by the gallows. He watched the executions firsthand. During his personal interrogations, he maintained direct eye contact with the prisoners. He studied the shifting expressions on their faces as the trapdoors opened beneath their feet. He expressed visible satisfaction at the suffering of the regime's enemies. He wanted to see the violence unfold. His predecessor took a completely different path. Reinhard Heydrich organized the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. He gathered top officials to bureaucratize the extermination process. He viewed mass murder through the cold lens of a corporate executive. He tracked death tolls as mere numbers on printed charts. Kaltenbrunner rejected this detachment. He traveled directly to the killing sites for personal oversight. He actively used his legal background to outmaneuver political rivals within the treacherous hierarchy of the party. But he directed his skills toward immediate, tangible destruction. Heydrich was the architect. Kaltenbrunner was the demolition man. This demolition approach let him seize an unprecedented scale of control over human targets. Hundreds of thousands of lives in Eastern Europe fell under the jurisdiction of a single department. Einsatzgruppen mobile units executed these operations on the ground. They murdered over 1 million people across Eastern territories. The mechanics of death required constant coordination. Orders moved continuously through RSHA channels. The agency aligned deportation schedules with the concentration camp network. They managed foreign intelligence gathering networks simultaneously. Field officers actively crushed armed resistance movements across occupied Europe. Every daily report, intelligence brief, and execution order flowed directly to his desk. Control over this daily paper stream opened the heavy doors to the chancellery, allowing Ernst Kaltenbrunner to walk straight past formal SS commanders to the highest office. Inside the briefing room, the Austrian lawyer ignored the usual courtly rituals. Other officials coded their reports in heavy layers of obsequious flattery and ideological devotion. Kaltenbrunner stood before Adolf Hitler and delivered intelligence data in a sharp, blunt voice, offering raw facts without diplomatic hesitation. Hitler quickly grew to appreciate this harsh directness during the critical situational updates. This unfiltered personal access allowed the intelligence chief to entirely circumvent Heinrich Himmler when dealing with crucial security matters. Kaltenbrunner brought foreign espionage reports directly to the dictator, quietly displacing his own superior in the upper echelon of trust. He sidelined potential rivals. By placing his personal loyalists in key departments, he systematically outmaneuvered competitors and expanded his jurisdiction. The formal chain of command meant very little when a subordinate could simply hand sensitive documents to the ultimate authority in person. His influence reached its peak when suspicion of disloyalty fell upon Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of German military intelligence. The state dismantled the rival agency entirely, transferring its vast operational network directly into Kaltenbrunner's grasp. Before this hostile takeover, the Abwehr employed approximately 15,000 people, managing deep cover agents and frontline reconnaissance. This absorption gave one man control over both foreign espionage and domestic repression. The rival intelligence organization was absorbed into his central headquarters in 1944. By 1944, he reached the highest tier of the Reich hierarchy. Why did an Austrian lawyer risk his freedom during the early years of Nazism? He wanted the chance to decide other people's fates. His personal cruelty went far beyond political requirements. Witnesses recalled a genuine pleasure in domination, defined by the cold look of a man evaluating human lives. Ideology was a mask. He demonstrated early loyalty to the cause long before the party took control. He faced real threats of imprisonment in Austria, operating underground. During the 1930s, the Austrian state banned the movement entirely. Historians debated his true motives behind the racial rhetoric. He simply loved authority. He needed power. He craved the daily ability to determine who lived and who died. His peak influence coincided exactly with the beginning of the state's collapse. The first real test of this unchecked authority arrived on the 20th of July, 1944. Interrogation cells rapidly filled with suspects, and field officers applied well-rehearsed methods of physical coercion. the Gestapo arrested 7,000 individuals following a single failed assassination attempt. Kaltenbrunner personally supervised the resulting purges, sitting directly across from the accused to conduct the interrogations himself. Conspirators and civilian bystanders alike faced staged show trials before enduring deliberately humiliating executions at Plötzensee prison. As the military position deteriorated across Europe, the Gestapo and the security service merely tightened their administrative grip. Documents authorizing further mass deportations consistently landed on his desk for formal signature. Outside the administrative centers, the rhythmic metallic clatter of railway cars echoed across the major transport hubs. These scarce cargo trains carried prisoners toward the extermination camps, rather than transporting desperate reinforcements to the collapsing front lines. During that exact same summer, the massive Soviet offensive known as Operation Bagration was obliterating entire German army groups in the east. The Wehrmacht urgently requested rolling stock to deliver ammunition, but headquarters routinely denied their logistical pleas. Train cars were intentionally diverted away from the military to sustain the ongoing genocide. For the officers orchestrating this operation, the physical elimination of prisoners remained their primary objective. He continued signing the transport orders until the final days of the war. He signed transport orders until the very end. But parallel to this industrial slaughter ran a completely different private life. The architect of mass murder by day was a caring father by evening. His longtime mistress, Countess Gisela von Westarp, gave birth to his twins. He also had a wife and legitimate children. He maintained this domestic routine while simultaneously directing the extermination apparatus. This psychological split was not unique. Auschwitz Commandant Rudolf Haas displayed the exact same compartmentalization between family life and genocide. Kaltenbrunner was no social outcast. He maintained relationships. He inspired genuine affection in people around him. He integrated perfectly into high society. There were no obvious warning signs. That carefully constructed illusion of a normal life shattered in the spring of 1945. A man stripped of his SS uniform hid inside a remote Alpine cabin under a false name. Kaltenbrunner had retreated to the so-called Alpine Redoubt. He intended to use the Austrian mountains as a final fortress for the regime elite. He ordered subordinates to burn incriminating documents. Then he abandoned his post. He shed his military insignia and attempted to blend into the chaos of a defeated country. American troops captured him in May. His physical condition had drastically degraded during the weeks on the run. An overgrown beard covered his jaw. Sunken cheeks shadowed his severely thinned face, while he handed forged civilian papers to the officers. But the deception failed. He stood exactly 2 meters tall, a physical anomaly that made any attempt to vanish impossible. The former commander of the state security apparatus was now an ordinary prisoner awaiting trial. The long wait concluded with the heavy sound of boots climbing 13 wooden stairs. On October 16, 1946, 3 black scaffolds stood inside the former gymnasium of the Nuremberg prison. Ernst Kaltenbrunner walked toward the rope as one of the 10 defendants executed that night. The International Military Tribunal had already found him guilty. Judges confirmed his direct involvement in crimes against humanity. Göring had cheated death. The former Reichsmarschall avoided the gallows by swallowing a hidden glass vial of cyanide hours earlier. Kaltenbrunner had no poison. Guards marched his tall figure upward to face the executioner on the wooden platform. The court had previously documented his direct signatures on thousands of death warrants. Standing over the drop doors, he loudly affirmed eternal loyalty to the German nation. He died on the rope, firmly refusing to accept personal guilt for his documented crimes. The path to that rope began months earlier. 22 major war criminals faced the judges. The International Military Tribunal convened inside the Nuremberg Palace of Justice in November 1945. The heavy stone complex survived the Allied bombing raids. Here, the former head of the entire state terror apparatus sat in the dock. He insisted he was merely a rank-and-file employee without any real authority. The man who controlled a vast network of secret police claimed the role of an ordinary intelligence officer. Other defendants chose different survival tactics during those hearings. Hermann Göring openly defended the regime from the stand. Albert Speer admitted partial responsibility, presenting himself as a misled technocrat. Rudolf Hess chose to fake insanity. Ernst Kaltenbrunner built his entire defense on total denial. He claimed complete ignorance of the concentration camps and the gas chambers. He denied knowing about the mass shootings. He knew nothing. The strategy required him to reject reality itself. Prosecutors brought forward thousands of pages. They presented orders. The files authorized mass executions. He denied everything. He looked at the paperwork bearing his own signature. Prosecutors confronted him with these pages. He declared them forged. When survivors identified him, he called their witness testimonies a falsification. His dismissals of the witness testimonies failed against the physical evidence resting on the courtroom tables. How did the Allied prosecution break his strategy of total denial? They bypassed his spoken words and brought out his own official orders. Prosecutors laid the original bureaucratic papers across the wooden desks for the judges to see. The defendant was forced to look down and recognize his own name on the pages. Dark ink strokes across the bottom of the documents authorized the mass deportations of civilians. The prosecution reconstructed his movements through the extermination sites to prove his direct involvement. They presented detailed logs documenting his inspections of the Mauthausen concentration camp. This specific facility was located just a short distance from his own Austrian hometown of Linz. Records showed he had stood inside the perimeter and watched executions take place. The courtroom watched him physically shrink as the prosecutors traced the administrative chain of command directly to his desk. His responses on the witness stand degraded into desperate attempts to shift the blame to dead superiors. As the factual documents mounted, Kaltenbrunner suffered a sudden medical episode that temporarily halted the entire proceeding. Many observers suspected this collapse was a calculated attempt to escape the accumulating stack of papers against him. Stripped of his protective uniforms and his state organization, the man who commanded the secret police collapsed before their eyes. Only fear remained. This pathetic display in the courtroom completely contradicted his towering height and imposing physical exterior. Deep scars stretched across his face, terrifying the spectators at the Nuremberg tribunal. But these marks did not kill people. Legal decisions did. His aggressive features provided a convenient illusion for the public. It feels safer to believe that architects of mass murder carry visible warnings. In reality, Ernst Kaltenbrunner acquired those deep facial cuts during student fencing duels at the University of Graz. He was merely an Austrian lawyer. The terrifying appearance made him memorable among the Nazi elite, yet it masked a grim bureaucratic routine. The destruction of millions did not stem from a frightful gaze. His true danger lay in his education and his pen. Behind the scarred face was a man trained in the law. He drafted orders to expand the Gestapo and SD. The Reich demanded organized murder, and the lawyer provided the necessary paperwork. He applied legal precision to state slaughter. People search his photographs for signs of a monster, finding false comfort in his menacing look. The truth remains far more disturbing. The atrocities documented by prosecutors were not the work of a mindless brute acting on violent impulses. Every criminal directive passed across a wooden desk. Every lethal mandate carried a deliberate ink mark. The execution orders and deportation schedules were signed by him personally. Those precise ink signatures made him the most lethal figure among the Reich elite. Adolf Hitler dictated the European genocide from heavily guarded headquarters in East Prussia. The Führer never stepped inside a single concentration camp. He never saw a mass grave. Heinrich Himmler managed the vast SS organization from a quiet desk in Berlin. But the supreme commander of the terror apparatus could not stomach the physical reality of his own policies. During a mass shooting in Minsk in August 1941, A victim's blood splashed onto Himmler's uniform. He nearly lost consciousness. The Reichsfuhrer physically turned away from the execution trench in horror. Reinhard Heydrich had structured the extermination logistics before Czech operatives killed him in Prague in May 1942. His assassination removed a purely bureaucratic administrator of death. A very different manager stepped into that void. The highest leadership of the Third Reich relied on a strict psychological separation between administrative decrees and physical violence. The bureaucracy required distance. Men in clean uniforms issued directives from Berlin. Low-ranking subordinates pulled the actual triggers in the forests. Ernst Kaltenbrunner shattered that protective boundary. He routinely signed execution warrants condemning thousands of people to death. He stamped the deportation schedules. Then he pushed his heavy wooden chair back. He walked out of his office. He traveled directly to the camps. His official staff car parked near the concrete execution walls at Mauthausen. The damp air smelled of copper and burnt gunpowder. Kaltenbrunner stood still. He watched his own paperwork become physical reality. He observed the executions without flinching. Most high-ranking officials mediated their massive crimes through endless, complicated chains of military command. They required geographical distance to function. Kaltenbrunner thrived on physical proximity. He directed a vast continental intelligence network from the bright top floor of his headquarters. Down in the dark basement cells, he personally interrogated prisoners. By 1943, the state completely dropped its final masks of legitimacy. The earlier years relied heavily on careful propaganda and rigid legal formalism. Now, the escalating crisis of the regime demanded a drastic shift in management. The highest echelons of power required leaders with a clear inclination for direct violence. Ernst Kaltenbrunner answered this call perfectly. He assumed command of the security apparatus during a critical turning point. From his central headquarters on Prinz Albrechtstrasse in Berlin, he escalated the terror. His Austrian origins provided a unique foundation for this ruthless governance. The underground movement in his homeland cultivated a deeply radical approach to political power. Kaltenbrunner embodied this militant extremism without hesitation. Under his authority, the organization completely abandoned all formal legal justifications. The administrative machine required no ideological excuses or delicate bureaucratic niceties anymore. He established a system based purely on the unvarnished exercise of physical force. The continental apparatus operated at peak intensity despite inevitable military collapse. This unmatched systemic terror defined the last 2 years of the war. The total collapse of the state apparatus in 1945 generated an entirely new dilemma for international justice. Ordinary clerks routinely filled out deportation paperwork in quiet municipal offices. Train engineers deliberately drove their freight cars across the continent. You can almost hear the steady, rhythmic clatter of wagon wheels rolling over iron tracks toward distant extermination centers. These millions of accomplices drove a massive, highly compartmentalized machinery of industrialized murder. Yet their collective participation demanded a psychological defense mechanism once the military defeat shattered their administrative reality. The courtroom strategy of absolute denial emerged not as an isolated anomaly, but as a universal template for survival. At Nuremberg, top officials adamantly rejected legal accountability and claimed complete ignorance of the atrocities committed under their direct command. This refusal to acknowledge reality mirrored the behavior of countless lower-level perpetrators scattered across the ruined continent. Former concentration camp guards quietly removed their uniforms. They walked back into ordinary civilian life without facing any legal consequences. These enforcers returned to their hometowns and found regular jobs while maintaining absolute silence about their past. West German courts ultimately convicted only a few thousand individuals out of the millions who actively participated. The vast majority lived out their natural lives without ever answering for the documents they stamped. This scale of impunity highlights the fundamental division of labor within the totalitarian state machine. The focus on high-ranking leaders often obscures the broader societal complicity that made these unprecedented crimes logistically possible. Almost nobody voluntarily admitted guilt or accepted moral responsibility for the millions of lives extinguished. Former functionaries claimed powerlessness, insisted they merely followed orders, or portrayed themselves as victims of circumstances beyond their control. This collective denial established a pattern of refusal that defined an entire generation. In the end, only one towering executioner dropped from the wooden scaffold at Nuremberg. Meanwhile, millions of ordinary clerks and train drivers remained completely free to build the post-war world.